Like, the cost-benefit analysis just doesn't make sense on that. It feels like you're basically putting in more effort for the same shit that guys were putting little to no effort for, which just doesn't seem fair for most guys. Like, that's how us guys kind of look at it. And fine, someone can come in and be like,
"The royal penis is clean, Your Highness."
welcome to the Break Time Podcast, where I talk about love, sex, and relationships from a guy's perspective, as well as a bunch of other guy shit. The man on the mic is a man who might find it hard to breathe if you've got that asthma. He's also a man who does include running his mouth to his cardio routine. It is none other than your tall, dark, and mildly handsome man, Sir Denver B, and I am here to talk about men. Okay, no, actually, it's more of me talking about women. Actually, okay, how do I put this? I'm describing stuff relating to guys and why guys may choose to do or not do things to women, so you can try and figure out which side I'm speaking for, but I'd probably like to think that I am going to talk about men. But, if you don't feel that way and you feel like it's about women, let's say maybe you're a feminist, then yeah, it's about women, just so that you can keep you happy, alright? But all in all, I do have quite a bit that I do want to talk about. So I've got a case of a woman on a podcast busy talking about why men should marry the hoe. And, while I do have my reservations on that, I do at least want to hear how then explain why guys shouldn't or don't usually do that. Then also there's a case of a woman busy asking why it is that men don't flirt anymore. And I need to get into that. And considering that I do have all of that to speak about, I do hope that, at the end of the episode, you'll probably like what it is that you're listening to, or you'll agree with me. But even if you don't, I want to at least tell you that should you agree with it, should you not agree with it, should you have a different form of feedback, or should you want to suggest a potential topic and or potential guest that I should be having on the podcast, then the DMs are always open. The social media links are usually in the description, and I would be more than happy to check your DMs and handle them accordingly. And with that said, should you feel like maybe going to the description of the episode might seem like too much work to get to the socials, then you can always listen all the way till the end where I usually mention them, because I always mention them at the end of just about every single episode, and you can use that social media to get to me. But all in all, I do hope that you are enjoying what it is that you're listening to, and you do listen all the way till the end. Now, with that said, I want to kick things off by talking about a lady by the name of Karine Steffans. Now, if you're a Gen Z, you probably don't know who Karine Steffans is, and if you're a millennial, there's a good chance you also might not know who Karine Steffans is. Now, Karine Steffans is basically the early 2000s idea of the video vixen. Like, the idea of the video vixen and the term video vixen basically started with her, and it became a pretty popular thing up until like the mid to late 2000s, where stripper culture kind of came in and they kind of dissolved the idea and just made it look like glorified hoes or glorified strippers. So Karine Steffans kind of built her name by being a video vixen. She even wrote a book on it. And, she's kind of done her thing for a bit, trying to pop in and out of the media here and there. Although I don't really think she's had too much success with having like a lot of fame and relevancy in today's day and age. But in a recent podcast called Good Moms Bad Choices, she did talk about the idea of marrying the hoe. She went ahead to try and make a convincing point as to why it is that we should have more men that are marrying the whore or the hooker. And, there are potential benefits to it. And while I do have my thoughts on it, I do want to give them out before you hear what it is that she had to say about it. And then while you're busy trying to process if what she said makes sense or not, I can give you my thoughts on it and you can see which side you would like to side with. So let me just let the clip play. So without further ado...
And love sluts. Like a cum dump type of... Like you want this. But patriarchy says you can't marry this. Patriarchy says, marry the virgin.
But then you the slut behind her back, you lose her trust.
You're gonna ruin her life. I want more men to feel safe marrying the whore. Because they're gonna keep you good. You're gonna wake up to sucks. You wake up, I'm already on freak shit. There's nothing you can't propose to me that I won't at least consider. I like doing household chores, but for sake, first thing in the morning, my man gets this, and he gets it in any way he wants. And he would crawl on my face and Exactly.
Start at home, where you really want to be. A couple weeks ago was my birthday. The plan was that we're going to have a foursome.
Okay. So she was saying that, men should marry the whore, but apparently it's patriarchy that has told men to not marry the hoe, marry the virgin. And then, the other person that she was on the podcast with decided to add, and cheat on her with a whore. And she believes that is a much better alternative, or at least that, marrying the whore or the hooker is the better alternative as opposed to marrying the virgin. And okay, she has tried to make a pretty good point where it's like, okay, instead of going through the pains of, trying to deal with a babe that might not be all about it like that, at least be with a babe that is really down to like give it to you from like the moment you wake up, because it saves you from a lot. And I can get that to some degree, to a very tiny one that is, but I don't think she understands why guys don't marry the hoe. Like, maybe it's just that she kind of thinks about it one way, but I don't think she understands why men don't marry the hoe. Because the reason, I'd say, for just about any guy is pretty straightforward, and that is the fact that, like, we don't want to take full responsibility and take on the burden of full responsibility for someone who is giving the best parts of herself for a lot less than that. Like, there has to be a risk-reward ratio that makes sense for us. There has to be a cost-benefit analysis whenever it comes to pulling a babe, that we kind of have to think through and be like, okay, this makes sense for whatever efforts that I'll be putting in and whatever it is that I do feel like I should be signing on for. Because full well, like, some of these guys didn't have to put in much effort. Hell, some of these guys were just hitting it just because she likes them, and probably she was letting them hit in like T-minus a couple of hours from meeting them and getting to know them. But then now you're expected to go ahead, take on the burden of not only just trying to be with this babe, but also basically taking them under your wing and, being responsible for them and giving them, all of these things that you're supposed to give them. And yet a bunch of other dudes were getting it for free. Like, the cost benefit analysis just doesn't make sense on that. It feels like you're basically putting in more effort for the same shit that guys were putting little to no effort for, which just doesn't seem fair for most guys. Like, that's how us guys kind of look at it. And fine, someone can come in and be like, oh, but at least you'll be getting the head and all of the sex, and this babe will be ready to give it to you any and all times. And that might sound great, but how much of a relationship is built on sex? Like, sex is one tiny part of the entire process. There's so much more to relationships, more so marriages. The sex is a very tiny part of it. Like, don't get me wrong, it's great and it's absolutely important, but it's one element out of like so many. And I can say this even though I haven't been married, because I've at least observed some of my married friends, and I see that being married takes effort. So saying that you should marry the hoe because of, supposedly having great sex every day, I don't know, like, it just feels like it's such a small bit that would justify such an expensive, or should I say such a costly decision. Besides that, there's other issues that come along with it, whereby, you have to contend with the fact that, she might have been with all of these guys and she might have picked up a bunch of trauma from them or just been treated like shit. So now you have to deal with that as well. Do you have to go through that? No. You can find someone that hasn't gone through such a thing or has healed from that trauma and have something particularly solid, as opposed to being with a hoe. On top of that, there's the idea that because she's a hoe, there's a chance that she might end up giving it up to another dude while the two of you are together. So who would want to go through the issues of trust, the handling of the trauma, and whatever other BS I've mentioned, all just for a babe just because she's going to suck your dick every morning? Like, I honestly don't think that juice is worth the squeeze, to be quite honest. So for anyone that's listening that might have sided with her, I will tell you that it's not the patriarchy that told men to not marry the hoe. It's just what it is that you would want from her, you can probably get from another babe, and you don't have to put in as much effort. And what it is that you may want from a marriage or from a long-lasting relationship, you don't necessarily have to get it from someone who's a hoe. But then again, I could be wrong about this, and maybe it might sound like I am fighting for the virgins, even though I'm not really. Frankly, I don't really give too much of a shit. But either way, I am going to leave it at that and move it on to our main topic of this episode. Now, not too long ago, while I was on Reddit, I stumbled across a post where a lady was complaining about how hard the streets are, not because of how relationships are going per se, but because of the fact that the art of flirting has been lost. Now, she did post this up on Reddit, and I did pick on what it is that she said, as well as a couple of the comments, so I am going to read it out. So the title of the post was "The Streets Are Cold as Fuck," and she says, and I quote, "I feel like the art of flirting has been lost. Everyone seems to pride themselves on being quote-unquote straightforward. I mean, I get it. But I mean, that can't be the substitute for all the charm, that subtle tension, and the excitement of getting to know someone. I think that's part of why I'm finding it so hard to find someone. Bring it all back, Amma is a girl asking for too much." End quote. And when I read this post, I could kind of get why she'd be feeling that type of way, and I can also get why the art of flirting has been lost. But I wanted to get into the comments first, then get into my thoughts on it, because I do feel like I know why a lot of guys aren't good at flirting or just don't flirt at all. And there's a couple of different reasons which I'll explain, but let's see. Let's see what the comments have to say. So the first comment says, and I quote, "We live in an age of too many options. Imagine flirting with everyone that catches your eye. It's exhaustion. You could do it one at a time, but if each doesn't work, you waste a lot of time and energy. So the straightforward approach is a sieve. The flirting comes later after locking in true potentials." End quote. Okay, this isn't bad. It's a fairly solid point. It's just, I feel like you can do it in both instances, where you can basically flirt with a babe as you're trying to lock her in, and even after you've locked her in, hell, even in the relationship, you guys can and probably should continue flirting, because it's an interesting thing. It's an interesting sort of dance around with words and conversation to generate interest and desire for each other, which I do believe, people should do from time to time. But with that said, I'm going to leave it at that and move it on to the next comment, which said, and I quote, "Not gonna lie, I don't wanna sound weird, but sex is way better when you've been marinating your mama with sweet nothings here and there. Lakini pia, it's also risky to try it the first time." End quote. Which is a very, very valid point. I do think that a lot of guys do find it to be very risky to try flirting with a babe on first contact. Now, of course, there are instances where it's a lot easier to do it than others, which is why I think, because a lot of guys just aren't doing it as much, they probably don't know the instances where they should do it. And to be quite honest, dude is also right. It is a very, very nice thing to do. It's almost like a dance, in my opinion. And as a fun way to keep conversation going, I do think that flirting is particularly nice. But with that said, let me move on to another comment, which looks like it was written by a woman who said, and I quote, "I know, right? The implications and subtle tension is what makes romance admirable, not direct and explicit and in your face like everything is nowadays." End quote. And I understand this lady. Not because I yearn to be flirted with on a daily or anything of that sort, but mostly because there's a lot of quote-unquote straightforward that's killed a lot of the, can I call it, more interesting, more appealing, more desirable bits that come with a lot of things like intimacy, but more so sex. And you see this quite a bit whenever it comes to media, because back in the day, people used to almost idolize the idea of the sex scene in movies or in series. Nowadays, there's some series where almost every episode just has sex scenes, and those sex scenes are very, very explicit, so there's very little left to the imagination. And when your imagination isn't running wild, it's like it just comes and it goes, and it's such a quick, fleeting moment that it now becomes hard for such a moment to be considered memorable, not unless if there was something crazy or a particular bit of that scene that really stood out to you. And if you see a bunch of those scenes over time in the media, or even, when you can throw in porn down, when you can throw in social media and shit, it kind of loses its appeal after a bit of a while. As opposed to back in the day where there was a lot more censorship and people were hiding a lot more, you would have the bit that you would really, really like, but there was always room for imagination that would make it more desirable, because you almost want to confirm if the fantasy matches the reality to some degree. And I do think that that's something that has made the whole idea of being quote-unquote straightforward and blunt particularly sad, because you being straightforward and blunt might seem like an act of boldness or confidence, or you making things better for yourself, but it kind of kills a lot of the interest and color, and you could argue saturation, that makes conversations so nice and desirable. But anyways, let me move on to my last comment, then I can give my thoughts on it. So on to the last comment, which says, and I quote, "They told us that this is bare minimum. Then they added on bills that we're supposed to pay first before we even start knowing them, so most dudes like me don't bother wasting time. Straight to the point, because dating has become so transactional nowadays that when she starts with those stupid demands, you check out and on to the next." End quote. Okay, I get where dude is coming from to some degree. I would probably argue that this is very dependent on the babe that you're with and your approach with said babe, because I do tend to think that not all relationships are supposed to be transactional or are transactional. And depending on the babe that you're with, or depending on the babe that you're trying to hit on, she may want it in a more transactional sense, because, you know, maybe she wants you to pay for shit. But it doesn't necessarily mean that every single woman looks at it in a transactional way. But I can get the whole you being looked at and it being called bare minimum. Like, this whole term bare minimum has turned off so many guys that a lot of guys are getting to a point where they don't feel like putting in any effort, because any of those efforts, instead of being appreciated or even just not being spoken about at all, will be classified as bare minimum, which is even worse than not recognizing it, because you've already recognized it, you've just put it in a category where it shouldn't really mean much. Like, that, in my opinion, is the thing that annoys a lot of guys. And I can also understand why guys would stop putting in effort because you decided to call something bare minimum. Now, with that said, I am going to leave that and get to my thoughts on it, because first off, I feel like there is definitely truth to this, and by this I mean the post where this lady saying that the art of flirting has been lost. I don't think it's been lost per se. I do think that it is something that is a lot more scarce nowadays. It's a skill that is known to a few people that are pretty far between each other. And I don't think it's because it's such a hard skill to master. I just think that most people either haven't had much practice with it or just don't see much of a value in really having the skill. And I will get to the reasons why I do think that that's the case. But one other thing that I do think that we also do need to remember is that flirting is a skill. It's, while it's also been referred to as an art, flirting is kind of like a skill, just like conversation, just like many other things that we seem to have abandoned or maybe doing. And the thing with a skill is it requires practice. There's not that many people that are just naturally good at flirting. Honestly, I don't even think that there's people that are naturally good at flirting. So as a skill, like, it needs to be practiced from time to time, or at least, needs to be practiced regularly. But with that being said, like, I don't think that guys are getting much practice when it comes to flirting. And because of that, we seem to also be losing the art, not just because people don't see much value or people don't like it or anything of that sort. It's just the fact that there's a lot of guys that, even though they'd have loved to basically flirt with different women, just don't get enough of a chance. And there's a reason why I feel like all of these things make it such that, the art of flirting or even the skill of flirting seems to be getting lost. And if I was to try to sum it up, I'd probably say that there's three main reasons for it. So the first one is the fact that in today's day and age, we've just gotten so much selective benefit that we don't want the pros with the cons. So this is something that you get to see quite a bit whenever it comes to just a lot of stuff that Gen Z has gotten to experience. So for example, if you want to talk to a babe but you don't want to go through the public humiliation, you slide through the DMs. You don't go in on like a cold approach and try to talk to her physically. Like, I know people who will definitely see a babe they like. They will want to make an approach. They will want to get to know this babe and possibly have something. But instead of them walking up to them straight and trying to talk to them, they would much rather try and find out what the babe's IG is and then slide into the DMs. And it's a way of basically trying to get all of the pros with none of the cons that come with you trying to approach a babe and getting rejected. Because if you get rejected in the DMs, not unless if she's taking a screenshot to share or to show her friends, it's not like you're really going to go through the humiliation of going to approach said babe and getting rejected. So that selective benefit makes it such that there's a lot of guys that want the pros that come with trying to flirt with a babe, but also don't want the cons of being rejected by a babe because, they were trying to flirt and the babe wasn't interested. Then the second reason why I feel like the art of flirting seems to be getting lost is because we don't have enough places, or should I call it situations, to actually flirt. Like, people talk about trying to approach a babe, and I was even talking about, social environments to approach a babe. But also, like, how many environments can you say that a lot of people have where you can go and flirt with someone or basically approach someone and try to be flirty with them? Because I'll tell you for a fact, there's not that many. Like, people go to the club and you would assume that because people are going to the club and some guys are trying to pick up a babe from the club, or should I say a babe or two from the club, that it would be this place where guys will go and they'll try to be flirty and shit. But when you're at the club, like, there's a bunch of noise, you can barely hear each other, you have to basically shout at the top of your voice for someone else to hear you. So it's not like you're trying to say something witty in between trying to buy a babe drinks. I'm just saying, like, it's hard for you to go and construct like a smart thing to say or a witty thing to say when you're busy trying to basically project your voice so that someone else can hear it. One kind of has to take the lead, and it usually comes at the cost of the other. And maybe I'm talking about the club too much, but you look at other places, like, people are usually, and this is something you see nowadays, going to do their shopping and they have earphones on, probably because they're listening to music or they just don't want to be disturbed. And you'll even hear girls who talk about how they go to the gym but they don't want to be talked to. They will talk about how, whenever they go to places, they don't want to be talked to. They just want to go do their shit and leave. So you hear enough women saying that online and also offline, and you're like, if that's the case, then why the hell would I bother trying to approach you to flirt with you? Like, for guys, that's just a situation where it's like you're inviting problems into your life, considering the consequences of not just someone that isn't interested in you, but someone that didn't want to be talked to. So that definitely carries weight. Then last but not least, the third reason, we're losing the art of conversation, and that's basically the core of flirting. So let's say that yes, there is selective benefit, but strip it away and there's no selective benefit. People are willing to take the pros and the cons that can come with flirting and trying to approach someone. And let's also strip away the whole reasoning where we're like, we don't have enough places to flirt. Let's say there's more social events where people can talk to each other and it's, an open conversation where you can approach someone and basically flirt with them. Let's say that both of those things still exist. The last bit of it is the art of conversation, and so many of us have lost it or are losing it in real time that it is getting to a point where being flirty is just hard. And there was actually a comment where someone had spoken about how, flirting requires you to be well versed and witty, and the reason why we don't have that is because people aren't reading too many books. And I can get that. It definitely does carry weight, but just maintaining an actual conversation with people is something that I feel people are losing so much sight of. And that's why flirting in and of itself becomes hard, because just being able to start and maintain a conversation is one part of an approach. Actually, I'd even argue that it's the main part of the approach. After you've already approached the person, you're trying to start a conversation and you kind of have to do some work to maintain it. But in that is why you're supposed to be comfortable enough to actually flirt with said person. And the thing is, there's so many people that have lost the art of conversation, just starting or even maintaining one, that they end up losing the art of flirting, not because they don't have the creativity or the imagination, but rather the fact that they seem to have lost the art of conversation at its core. So from that and the other two reasons, I can totally get why the art of flirting is so lost or seems so lost. It's just so much harder to do it, and a lot of people may be losing the ability to do it altogether. And with that said, now the bigger question of course is going to be, how can we fix this? Can we actually fix this? And I'm not gonna lie, it's hard, because the times when flirting was basically at its peak, which was somewhere around like the 205s, 206, all the way till like 2016, 2017, where pickup artistry really did come up. That time, I'd say Pandora's box wasn't all the way open, and right now it is. So stuffing a bunch of this stuff back is going to be hard. But I'd probably say if we had more social events that discouraged people from being groupies and just encouraged people to just talk to each other, or we had people just going to places and just learning to talk to each other without having to sit and like focus on their phones or distract themselves through some other means, then maybe we can bring back the art of conversation and the art of flirting. On an individual level, I'd say just try stirring up conversations with different people as much as possible. And while it might seem hard and maybe a little tiring at first, the more you do it, the better you get at it. And for the most part, it's not like you're really trying to get too much out of the person, or it's not like you're trying to do it for any gain. You're just doing it so that you can improve your conversation skills. So you can basically just do it. And even though it doesn't turn out great, even though you don't like the conversations, even though you're not really into the person, you can just do it for the sake of the conversation, get done and move on with your life. Once you become good at conversation skills, I do feel like the art of flirting just comes next, and that one just requires you to be a little bit more playful with your speech, in my opinion. But with all of that said, let me just conclude, and I want to conclude by talking about CVs as they've been for the past couple of years. So if you're someone that's trying to get a job, or you have tried to get back into the job search over the past, call it 7, 8, maybe 9 years, then you've probably noticed that your CVs are supposed to be shorter, and a pretty big part of this is because, one, like most people don't care too much about all the 50 places you've worked in, and also there's a system that will run through it, look for keywords, and those keywords are the ones that will elect you, and whoever it is that's probably reading that CV is probably going to be looking over it for like seconds, not like minutes. It's seconds, and it's basically like single digit seconds. So it doesn't really make sense for people to do a particularly long CV. And I think people have translated that to a bunch of other things, conversations being one of them, whereby we've gotten to a point where we're basically just having a conversation to try and move information from one point to the next, or to basically channel it from one person to the next. Yet conversation should be more than that, and we should learn to make it more than that, so that way when we want to be playful with it, it won't be as hard, because we're not struggling to just keep the conversation going. And maybe, just maybe, if we did that, we wouldn't have so much of an issue with this art of flirting that seems to be turning into a lost art. But then again, with that said, maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I haven't been looking at it particularly well, but either way, I want your thoughts on it. The DMs are open on IG, it is at the breaktime_podcast. On Facebook, it is at the breaktime podcast. On X, it is at Bagaka the D. And on Bluesky, it is at the breaktimepod.bsky.social. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end, and I will catch you guys on the next break.
But what I believe is that if you put a pastor and a prostitute in one room, one is likely to convert the other.